Good evening and welcome to the July 13th, 2022 meeting of the Montgomery County Historic Preservation Commission. My name is Bob Sutton and I'm the chair, and I'd like to begin by having commissioners introduce themselves, starting on my left, and then staff introduce themselves as well.
Jeffrey Haynes.
Karen Burdett.
Marcia Barnes.
Julie Pelletier.
Zara Nasser.
Michael
Mark
Kine.
Clements.
We have one who's remote.
Sorry about that. Michael Kine, Historic Preservation Staff.
And Dan Bruckert, Historic Preservation Staff.
Thank you. The first item on our agenda tonight is to consider historic area work permits, and we'd like to start by considering permits that we believe can be expedited. First of all, though, have these applications been advertised?
Yes, they were advertised in the June 29th edition of the Washington Times.
Thank you. So, is there anyone here to speak in opposition to any of these cases? The first case is 6907 Westmoreland Avenue, Tacoma Park. The second is the first one was 1A, 1B, 34 West Kirk Street, Chevy Chase. Case 1C at 10304 Kensington Parkway, Kensington. 1D at 14 Heska Street, Chevy Chase. 1E at 7317 Willow Avenue, Tacoma Park. Case 1F at 7212 Cedar Avenue, Tacoma Park. Case 1G at 6713 Westmoreland, Tacoma Park. And case 1I at 53 Philadelphia Avenue.
Mr. Chair, hearing no objections, I move that we approve the following historic area work permits in accordance with the staff reports, based upon the record before us, and in consideration of the recommendations of the local advisory panels, including the conditions recommended by staff. HOP number 994922 at 6907 Westmoreland Avenue, Tacoma Park. HOP number 996598 and 996752 at 34 West Kirk Street, Chevy Chase. HOP number 997059 at 1034 Kensington Parkway, Kensington. HOP number 997234 at 14 Hesketh Street, Chevy Chase. HOP number 997512 7317 Willow Avenue, Tacoma Park. HOP number 997563 at 7212 Cedar Avenue, Tacoma Park. And HOP number 989155 at 6713 Westmoreland Avenue, Tacoma Park. And HOP number 997778 at 53 Philadelphia Avenue, Tacoma Park.
Thank you. Is there a second?
This is Commissioner Haynes. I'll second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you.
Aye.
Thank you. These are all approved, and thank you to whoever presented these for giving us projects that were so easily approved. And if you have any questions, you can contact staff starting tomorrow. We will now hear case number 1H at 37131 Underwood Street in Chevy Chase. Is there a staff report?
Yes, there is, Mr. Chair. We'll just hold on 1 second to get the screen shared out, and I believe there's somebody online who's called in to meet this, and I think he's being admitted as we speak. This is the staff report for 3713 Underwood Street in Chevy Chase. This is an individually listed master plan site. The Clark House was constructed circa 1898, and as a master plan site, its standards of review are Chapter 24A and the Secretary of the Interior's standards for rehabilitation. This is an interesting property because it's one of 19 that were added to the master plan as individual sites instead of expanding the district boundaries for Chevy Chase Village. There was sufficient opposition to expanding the boundaries by the residencies that the HPC at the time just designated these 19 properties. So this is one of them that's associated with the development of Chevy Chase, but outside of the district boundaries. So the applicant proposes to install two low-profile Velux skylights to the east and west roof slopes and install two small wood casement windows in the rear gable. This is a roof plan showing the two skylights. They're 21 inches wide and 54 inches tall, which means they'll fit through the rafters. Here is the east elevation on the left and the west elevation on the right. Just to familiarize yourself with the property, it's a front gable house. You see on the upper image is the east roof slope. The house is on a double lot, and it's shifted to the west so that east roof is more visible from the public right-of-way than the west, which you see in the lower right corner. This is actually a 4.5-year-old photo. You can see by the changing leaves, but you can see that the roof plane is visible from the right-of-way. So staff finds that the two wood casement windows at the rear are compatibly designed with the house and recommends the HPC approve them. And then staff considered several factors in evaluating whether the house could accommodate any skylights, including the fact that the property is a master plan site, that the historic roofing material has been removed, the impact the skylights will have on the roof form itself and the 2-inch frame profiles, and then the visibility of the two roof slopes. And staff finds that the subject property can accommodate skylights. Staff found the narrowness of the skylights wouldn't impact the existing roof framing, making the proposal compatible with Standard 10. We as a staff wrestled with this a bit, and we considered potentially relocating the frontmost skylight to the rear of the house, but was told that that would not work because of the interior space arrangement. Staff considered eliminating or recommending the elimination of the frontmost skylight from the proposal completely, but found that a single skylight looked visually imbalanced and inappropriate. And staff came to the conclusion that the proposed two skylight arrangement was most appropriate and would not detract from the character of the house under 24A8B2 and recommends the HPC approve it. And I am here to answer any questions that you have.
Any questions for staff? Commissioner Barnes.
I believe you had some conversation with the applicants about whether or not the skylights could be to the rear of the dormers, and that didn't work. Is that?
Yes, I mean, the applicant and her architect are here, and I think that's a question better posed to them.
Okay, thank you.
Excuse me, any other questions for staff? I'm watching you, Commissioner Clemens, if you have any questions. I don't see any. Thank you. So now I'd invite the owner and the architect to come forward. The names I have here are Christopher Gray and Hannah Gray. Am I pronouncing your name correctly? Yeah, just like the color. Great. I'm Hannah Gray. I'm the owner. Okay, can you, if you could sit down and push the button on the speaker there. If it turns green, you're on, and if you could give your name for the record, that would be great. And you'll have 7 minutes to do your presentation. And at the end of that time, we will potentially ask you questions.
Sure.
Thank
Absolutely. So my name is Hannah Gray. As mentioned, I am the owner and resident at 3713 Underwood Street. And I want to start by saying thank you to the staff, and in particular Dan, for reviewing the proposal. We fully agree with the summary and the recommendation of the staff. And I would just like to take a few minutes today to introduce myself and to emphasize some of Dan's points. Hopefully, won't take the full 7 minutes. I did write down my statement in case I forgot what I wanted to say, but I'll try not to read from it. So my name is Hannah. Together with my husband, we purchased this home about 5 years ago. We're actually only the third owners of the home, which is really cool. And we have spent significant time and resources over the last 5 years to rehabilitate this home, which was actually originally deemed to be in unlivable condition when we purchased it. We have lovingly restored this home for our growing family. And during that time, we've been fortunate to be guided by my mother and father, who are both architects with significant career experience in historic preservation and restoration. And together, the four of us have put in years of literal blood, sweat, and tears into restoring this beautiful home for our family. our most recent proposal, which is before you today, is another step in making this a wonderful environment for our soon-to-be growing family. As Dan mentioned, we're seeking to add 4 skylights to the roof to bring in additional natural light to our attic space. The cathedral ceilings in the attic are vaulted to follow the roof line of the house, and the original windows of the house are actually quite small, which ends up creating a very dark environment in the attic. By adding 2 matching skylights on each side of the roof, we would bring natural light into the space while also hopefully minimizing the change to the roof exterior. As mentioned by Dan, the proposed skylights would be shallow in depth and would not introduce a significant protrusion to the roof line. As Dan mentioned, it's roughly like 2-inch protrusion, which we understand, as mentioned in the staff report, is generally less than what a solar roof installation would protrude, and also would take up obviously less space than a solar installation. Dan also mentioned that the skylights are narrow in order to fit between the existing rafters, and that would avoid any structural changes that we would have to make to the historic rafters in the roof line. And then in my statement, I had kind of already addressed one of your questions, I believe, which was the possibility of moving the skylight to the rear of the home. There's actually a bathroom with plumbing and tiling that sits to the north of that dormer that you see in the photo, which is technically the north is the rear of the house. So it wouldn't be possible to install a skylight behind that dormer because that's where the bathroom is located. The proposed skylight additions are approximately 7 to 8 feet back from the front roof line of the house. And we intentionally proposed as pulled back of a location as possible to minimize that visual effect. And then while the roof line is visible from certain vantage points, there is quite a bit of screening around the house. On the west side of the house, I think you saw in some of the photos, that roof line is generally obscured by our neighbor's house, which is quite large and close on that side. And there are also 2 quite mature trees, an ash tree and a maple tree that, especially when their leaves are out, provide quite a bit of screening of the roof line on that side. And then on the east side of the house, we have a crepe myrtle and another large maple tree that also provide quite a bit of screening on the east side. And in addition, there's an oak tree at the front that sort of screens from some of those front view sheds. So I've provided a number of photos in the application materials that you can refer to that actually show different vantage points from the sidewalk and the street to show that in a lot of the areas around the house, those roofline views are actually pretty obscured anyway. Finally, we agree that the location of alternate configurations of either a single narrow skylight on either side or 2 on one side and 1 on the other would tend to look unbalanced and potentially be more noticeable than the proportional 2 that we propose. And in addition, having 1 on either side or some other alternate configuration we feel would be disproportionate and wouldn't give that added light that we're looking for in the interior space. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. I also have my father, who also very graciously serves as our architect and reference for all of our various projects on this house. He's on the line virtually today to support us, and he would be happy to answer any technical questions that you would have. And with that, I would just close by, again, saying thank you for your time and your consideration today.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Ms. Gray? Commissioner Barnes?
Ms. Gray, I think you're fortunate to live in a house that in so many ways epitomizes what people think of when they think of Chevy Chase. There are a lot of grand sort of pseudo-Georgian houses that came a bit later, but I think yours really recognizes what was originally thought of as Chevy Chase and an early suburb. And I applaud you if it was an unlivable condition when you bought it 5 years ago and you've managed to bring it so far. You may not be aware that this commission concerns itself only with the exteriors. We don't have purview over the interiors. So you're looking for light on the inside. We're looking at the exterior of a master plan site and the impact that changes will have on that. I know you're putting some additional windows in the back, and they are quite small. And I don't know whether if you provide larger windows there, that helps you with your desire for greater light on the interior, nor do I know whether the dormers on the side have any impact on the light in the interior space. And I don't know whether you would care to address that, because you've said that the skylights are to give you more light in the space.
Yes, I'd be happy to address that. So the windows at the rear that we're proposing are quite small for a reason. There's actually a bedroom that sits, it's hard to explain, but so the roof is vaulted, and there's a bedroom at the back of the space with a loft above it, and the loft is very small. So picture like a little triangle like this. And on the exterior, of course, there's the historic trim that we have to avoid, and we want to leave a sufficient buffer between the end of the trim and the beginning of the new trim for these rear windows, which actually leaves like a very tiny little space to put these proposed windows at the rear. So in addition to that, as I mentioned, they're at the back of this loft area, so it doesn't bring any light into the sort of great room area that's where the skylights would be located. And then with respect to the dormers, those are sort of pulled out and also relatively small windows that, in part because they're, protruding in the dormers, don't carry too much light into the interior of the space. So that's the reason why we're proposing the addition of the skylights. And I don't know if my dad would have anything to add to that, but that would be my initial response.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I had a question. This is Commissioner Pelletier.
Commissioner Pelletier.
In the section in the package, there's I'm assuming maybe it's just like a tie bar or something going across up in the, what am I trying to say? Up in the attic, you've got like sort of two knee walls coming up on either side, and then there's this sort of cross piece. Is that ceiling or is that structure that's exposed?
Are you looking at this line?
I'm looking at
Oh,
this line right here.
I think you're speaking of the collar ties.
Collar ties.
Oh,
That was the word I was
there
trying
we
to think
go.
of. Yeah, so those are collar ties. There's
Oh,
not a ceiling in there.
Yes.
Sir, could you introduce yourself? I'm sorry,
Sure.
for the record. I know you're coming in online, but if you could introduce yourselves, that would be helpful. Thank you.
I'm Chris Gray, Hannah's father and freebie architect.
Thank
lucky
you.
me.
But yeah, the collar ties are at every rafter, which is 24 inches on center. And the uniqueness of this room, I think, is that Hannah and Duke wanted to not put a ceiling. There was never a ceiling there to begin with. It was just an unfinished attic. But instead of putting a ceiling there, they've drywalled the underside of the rafters all the way to the ridge line. So you have this wonderful 13.5, 14-foot height from the floor to the bottom of the ridge line, and you're looking up through these original 1898 collar ties, which are quite nice.
Yeah, and we've left the collar ties exposed, which
What's
we
the
think is
bottom?
kind of fun.
What's the height of the bottom of the collar tie? Like you're not bumping your head. I'm just
No,
curious.
no.
Okay.
Dad, do you know the height of the rough height of the collar
Yeah.
ties?
About 7 feet 10 inches,
Oh,
roughly.
okay. So the skylights are going to go in the way that you're showing them on the elevation. They're going to be in fairly high in the space?
They would sit above the collar
Okay,
ties.
okay. Oh, all the way
Yeah,
above the collar ties, or the collar tie's gonna kind of come in the middle of the skylight, sort of?
No, the bottom of the skylight is basically at the collar tie line. And the skylight will rise up the ridge line towards the ridge about it's a little less than 5 feet.
Okay. Okay, and do you know the model number of you're using Velux
Yes, I actually
skylights,
provided
right?
a spec sheet
Was there one
for
in
the
there? I
product
didn't
as one
see
of
it.
the attachments. I have it here.
Okay, I just wanted to confirm that 2 inches. That seemed kind of,
I have the specification
Okay.
here if you're interested,
Or I
but
can look.
it's in the application materials.
these are fixed, like curb mounted
Yeah, they don't
skylights?
pop up or anything like
Okay.
that. They're fixed, fixed
They're not
mounted.
even they're not even curb mounted, which are higher profile.
Oh,
These are
okay.
called deck.
Right,
And the deck mounted is fixed and it's secured right to the sheathing. And then the roofing is worked into around the flashing collar.
And
So that
they're
makes
lower.
the profile, that makes the profile as little as you can really get.
I see, okay. All right, thanks.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you very, very much. I will now ask deliberations. Anybody like to kick off? If there are no comments, I would welcome a motion. Did you want to? Okay, anybody? Commissioner Pelletier.
I guess I can comment. I agree with the staff report. I think if the profile is as low as it sounds and the structure's not getting damaged in any way, and this could be undone at any time, I could get on board with approving this application.
Thank you.
I can make a motion.
If you would like to make a motion, we will,
I will do my best.
okay.
I move that the Historic Preservation Commission, in accordance with the standards set forth in Section 24A of the Montgomery County Code, approve HOP number 997705, right? At 3713 Underwood Street,
Perfect.
Chevy Chase.
Perfect. Is there a second?
This is Commissioner Haynes. I'll second.
Thank you. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed?
No.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Oh, we have to.
We will do a roll call starting on my left with Commissioner Haynes.
Yes.
Commissioner Burdett, yes.
Barnes?
Commissioner
No.
Barnes, no. Commissioner Pelletier?
Yes.
Commissioner Nasser?
Yes.
Commissioner Clemens?
Yes.
And this is Chair Sutton, and I vote yes. So the vote is 6-1, approving this project. Thank you very much for coming before us, and we appreciate the work you've done on this house. You're very welcome.
Thank you for your time.
Oh,
Appreciate
our
it.
pleasure. Okay. Next item on the agenda. Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, that was very rude of me. I apologize. The next item on the agenda is a zoning text amendment, which is item number 3. And I believe staff member Mr. Dan Brooker will kick this off. And do you have someone else be involved with this?
I do. With us is Ben Berbert, who is shepherding this through
Thank you.
the planning board and county council, and we may call on him for his technical expertise and procedural expertise. Just shout at him and he'll come down, but otherwise he's happy to sit back. So this is this is a discussion of a zoning text amendment. Its number is ZTA 2206. This will actually be discussed at tomorrow's planning board meeting before it gets transmitted to the county council. So our discussion is timely. And this ZTA would allow certain non-residential uses on residentially zoned properties that are designated as historic sites on the master plan that have frontage on an arterial or higher road classifications. So the existing ordinance allows additional uses, but only to historic properties that have transferred some of their development rights. And this is the one property that was identified in the staff report that this applied to. This is Locust Grove, which is the Samuel Magruder House. And you see the historic house in the lower right with its addition. And you see about 3/4 of the site plan below. This had a detached accessory structure for drive-through banking. The HPC reviewed that, I think, in 2020, both to demolish it and conceptually to install a new one, but we haven't found a tenant for the bank yet, so that remains. But that's neither here nor there, because I just wanted to point out that the existing zoning ordinance only applies to one property. So the proposed changes, this will expand the class of properties covered by the ZTA to include all master plan sites in residential zones that front arterial roads. Just to correct my staff report, this will include 96 sites. There are some of them, like the Espinels Pet Cemetery, which likely won't be reused as something else, or the Linden Oak. But there are a number of properties that this will benefit. So the acceptable uses will expand to include clinics for medical purposes and office space. Some of the zones allow that as a conditional use currently under the zoning ordinance. Retail space, eating and drinking, rural antique stores, and then drive-through is an accessory to any one of those other uses. So again, this map sort of shows you how dispersed they are throughout the county. There aren't many arterial roads in the northwest part of the county. And again, the staff report talked about how they range in size from really, really tiny to more than 100 acres. So again, the ordinance is applying to all of those properties and trying to be as broad so it can capture what those properties are and their uses as much as possible. So the procedure, and this is one of the things that the HPC has been asked to weigh in on. Under the existing ordinance, certain uses are allowed as conditional uses. Again, an R60 can be converted into an office with some additional specific requirements. And the ZTA will change the process to allow a change in use through the site plan review only after the HPC has reviewed it and recommended to the planning board that they approve it. So I hope this helps break things down a little bit more. So again, under the conditional use, it would start with an HPC preliminary review, although that's not necessarily a requirement of a conditional use review. Then the planning staff reviews it, create a staff report, they make a recommendation to the planning board reviews it, and they make a recommendation, which then goes to the hearing examiner, who has sole discretion. And then after all of that, it would come in for a hop for any changes that need to be made after that. Sometimes that can be problematic because the hearing examiner comes to a conclusion that it would be contrary to changes that the HPC would approve, and then the process starts all back over again. Under the proposal, it'll actually start here with the Historic Preservation Commission. We'll rely on you for your expertise. Thank you very much. It would then go to the planning board for their site plan review. If they approve it, any changes that need to be made to the building would then come back for its final hop. So staff finds that the proposal will allow several more historic properties to be adaptively reused in locations where their historic use may no longer be desirable. In our work session, we talked about both the Bethesda Community Store as a property that we've heard multiple requests over the last several years, and some church properties where they would both take advantage of this in short order. Several building types that are included on the master plan, including schools and churches, generally have floor plans that are easily adaptable to a new use. As documented in the National Trust Research and Policy Lab, and this was laid out in more detail in the staff report that was circulated, adaptive reuse of historic properties can protect the historic character of the resource, which is something that we're all very supportive of, but also benefits the local economy and can do so in an environmentally sensitive manner. So there may be some concerns raised by the general public. Generally, those concerns are going to relate to increased either vehicular or foot traffic on these historic sites. And again, these are all residential zones. And the ZTA could allow uses in areas that are opposed by the surrounding community. To sort of assuage those concerns, the public will have a minimum of 3 opportunities to present testimony in open public meetings to air any concerns. And again, those would be the first HPC prelim, at the planning board hearing, and at the HOP stage. So hopefully any concerns could be well received and maybe integrated into whatever changes are required. And again, the HPC still has the ability to say no in the same way that we do with any other testimony, or receive it and then determine your own outcome. So staff finds the proposed ZTA will create a more streamlined process that will allow more historic properties to be put to productive use, and we're supportive of this. Staff recommends the HPC support the proposed ZTA and recommend the Planning Board and County Council approve its final passage, and direct staff, that's me, to draft a letter of support to transmit to the County Council supporting the ZTA's goals and proposed procedure, and that would be presented to the County Council before their hearing in September. And I am happy to answer any questions that you have, or to chicken out and invite Ben to answer your more technical questions.
Any questions for staff? Any questions for Ben? One, Commissioner Barnes.
Since I don't have a lot of familiarity with various zoning aspects, just to be clear, this impacts those properties which are in areas that are zoned residential, pure and simple. So, for example, when we saw the bank building that was going to be converted to a restaurant, that would not have ever entered into consideration because it was in a commercial district.
You're referring to the bank, the Tacoma Bank?
Yeah.
Okay, yes, that's a commercial zone, so it wouldn't be covered in this.
And so this is only if the property is in zoned residential. And I think you said it R60, which is a single family.
Right, all of the purely residential zones. So if it's, you know, we have some zones that are residential, commercial, that's not covered by it. It's only those that are zoned exclusively residential. Now, that may not have been the historic use.
No.
Because we have churches and schools and all sorts of other things. But they're in residential zones.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Pelletier, and then Commissioner Burdett.
Can you go back to the slide of the approval process for a second? So so is the site plan review the proposed review for this ZTA process, but the typical process is the conditional use?
So the proposed process is the site plan review with the additional requirement that they bring it to the HPC with a recommendation for approval. So under a site plan review for a development project, bringing it before the HPC is not a requirement. So this is specific to this zoning text amendment and these properties. They've added the requirement that they come to before the HPC.
And these are master plan properties?
Master plan sites.
Master plan sites.
This excludes districts.
Right. Okay, so this is not a district issue. This is master plan sites.
Right.
Okay, so is this something that the planning board, or I don't know where else it's going, are going to vote on how these are to be approved?
So the ZTA or the projects themselves?
You're getting help.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering if, like you were talking before about the conditional use, that the HPC preliminary review is not a requirement. And is that just in regular development, or is that on these master plan sites as well?
So, right, so it's not stipulated that it has to happen under the conditional use process.
Right.
So, the original text stated that projects would come in for site plan review with HPC prior authorization or prior thumbs up at least, unless the use was a conditional use in the underlying zone.
Okay.
In which case, maybe it would come forward, but maybe not, because that's not a requirement that they come before the HPC.
But it's still a master plan site.
So it would still need a hop for any
Right.
exterior changes.
Right, but it's a question of when we get our 2 cents.
Yes.
Right, in the process.
Yes.
So is there a way that in the conditional use process, because these are master plan sites, that the HPC preliminary review, if this is the way it goes down, that be a requirement?
That would require a change in the proposed text to make that a requirement. So,
Well, you're hoping for the site plan review.
right,
That's-
and the site plan in the proposed text requires an HPC preliminary consultation
Right.
and an approval recommendation.
And that's early in the process.
Yes,
That's like-
that would be before it goes to the planning board, who would approve the site plan, which would then allow the change to happen.
So the text that you have is proposing the site plan review.
Correct.
Process.
Yes.
So that's, unless they change the text, that is the way these things will get approved.
Yes, if the county council adopts the text as written.
As written. Okay. I just want to make sure we get in there early. And the conditional use where we don't comment until the end seems fraught. So.
Yes.
So you're proposing the other one, and the way the text is written, that is,
Yes.
okay. So
Our-
unless they change that.
Our position and our recommendation to you to support our position is that you are the technical experts when it comes to historic architecture and historic properties.
Right.
And you should be the ones to see it first and
Gotcha.
weigh in before anybody else does.
I got it. Okay. Thank you.
I do want to follow up really quickly. Ben Berbert, for the record, planner with
Thank
the
you.
Planning Department. So Dan is absolutely correct. The site plan process as proposed would get this before you, before it got any further in the process. I do want to be a little clear by making things muddier. The actual introduced ZTA kind of creates both processes. For uses that were on that list of 6 non-residential uses that are currently not allowed in the zone, they would come in as site plan process that it's on the right-hand column. For the uses, the 2 I pick on is the office and the medical clinic, because those are both conditional uses in a number of the residential zones now. The way the introduced ZTA actually would read is they would stay in the conditional use process. And I think we, upon looking at that, said it would be a lot cleaner and clearer if it all followed one process, and we preferred, for I think reasons that were discussed here, that site plan process. So that's what I am recommending to the planning board tomorrow, that they introduce or request the council to make that change. If the council does not make that change, I think what I'm hearing is we can at least try to request that the council include you in the process at the beginning if they choose to leave conditional use as the path they do this in. So I do want to be clear, we are recommending a site plan process. The introduced ZTA is actually a little muddy. I think what Dan is presenting to you is what we have changed as to what we want that ZTA to read as, and that's what we're going to push forward on. I get the sense there could be some pushback at council to making the change we're recommending. So I do also want you to be clear that I have heard very clearly, if they want to stick with the conditional use, we will at least try to ask them to amend the process to then let the HPC have a more forward role in that process rather than the sort of advisory, if the applicant feels like it, role that it has now.
Thank you. Commissioner Burdett?
I have 2, and the first one, I think is going to be easier for you guys to answer, but between the conditional use and the site plan use, how often does the public get to weigh in on these plans? And I'm thinking more of the the LAPs. Do they get to weigh in on these, in this process, more in one side than the other side?
If I were to remove the historic preservation component for a minute and just look at conditional use versus site plan,
Yeah.
the site plan process has one hearing, and it's with the planning board. And the planning board is the ultimate decision maker in that case. There's really two hearings with the conditional use process. However, the planning board's hearing is for a recommendation only. The board does not have approval authority on conditional uses. They are just recommending to the hearing examiner what the hearing examiner, what we hope they would do. The hearing examiner then has their own hearing to rehear evidence, potentially new evidence. So it creates a two-hearing process to do the conditional use process. But knowing that what comes out of the board's part of the hearing is not binding. It's the hearing examiner that has the binding decision.
So when the hearing examiner has their hearing, is there any public input at that point, or is that completely stopped at the planning board review and recommendation?
No, the public is able to submit testimony or show up to the hearing for the hearing examiner. I do know the hearing examiner is a little stricter in how they create kind of a party of record around who has standing in a case, but they will take evidence in from the public if the public has comments.
So with the conditional use, the public has 3 points when they can have a comment: during the planning board review, the hearing examiner, and during a HOP. The LAP would, I guess. Whereas in the site plan, it would only be the planning board review and the HOP review, because it wouldn't really, during our review, is there an opportunity? In the site plan, the proposed, the HPC review and recommendation, is that review?
That's required in the text. So,
Yeah.
so there would be a public preliminary consultation
Okay.
on the record. Everybody would be noticed, and in the case of LAPs, they are directly notified that there's an application pending. But they would be noticed in advance. They would
Okay.
be published just like any HOP or prelim is now. Again, with the conditional use column, you could almost cover up HPC preliminary review, because that's not a requirement under that process.
So they still get 3. They still get
there,
3.
yes, so there would be 2 bites at the apple for this body under the site plan, assuming they're making changes that require a HOP, and then again for the planning board, independent of that.
Okay. My second question is, at the beginning, you'd mentioned there were 94 properties, 96 properties that will be that could use this new process, whereas right now, there's just 1. And I think on your map, you had them colored up pink? Were they the pink or
Well,
they the blue?
There was some discussion, this was a bit of a moving target. There was some discussion about whether or not historic district properties would be included in this or not. They are not. That could be another ZTA for a different day. But the blue properties, the blue marks are the historic sites that are residential on arterial roads.
Okay, so what qualifies as an arterial road? What's the definition?
So that was an appendix in the staff report, and give me 1 second to log back into my computer because it went to sleep. But the primary considerations are speed, road width, lane width. It has to do with how heavily traveled it is. I think I included that as a,
Yes, it's
Okay.
here, it's here. So looking at, if I'm looking at the blue bits on the map, that's what we're talking about, residential and arterial, and they're pretty much scattered all over the place. So it's not like there's more of them down county than there are up county.
it's a countywide, I mean, this applies countywide. The types of resources are different in different locations. I mean, obviously there are at least 4 historic houses in Chevy Chase Village along Connecticut Avenue that I could think about that this would apply to.
Okay.
So those are very, very large houses, but they're also farms up county and smaller, more vernacular buildings. So this does apply to a huge variety of types and settings, because in the language of the zoning ordinance, it really needs to when you're talking about historic master plan sites.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Commissioner Barnes?
I wanted to come back to something you had said when you thought there might be some resistance to giving up the conditional use approval authority. And you mentioned, of course, the office use, a medical facility with up to 4 practitioners. And are there other things that you think would trigger a resistance to giving up the conditional use authority, in essence?
So I don't think it's that there's any particular use that's triggering that. I think it's just a procedural thing that it's allowed that way now. It's easier to just continue allowing it that way. I think one of the 2 primary reasons staff thinks that this should all be done under the site plan process, one, it's consistency. I think it's just easier to explain to people that these 6 uses that are in this section of the exemption code will always just be site plan if you're in a historic resource on an arterial or higher roadway. And I also think I think for reasons Dan's explained, it's just easier of a review. I think it gets more, I think it gets more opportunity and input for both this body and the planning board to actually weigh in on these things. I think there's a little concern with the conditional use process. You know, we make recommendations, we don't make final decisions. And I guess really if there's a third part to that, some of the standards that exist in the code now to allow, say, office as a conditional use in these residential zones really were written envisioning like a new office building coming in. You know, somebody having 2 acres of land along Old Georgetown Road, and they wanted to build a new office. There's these really big setbacks, really big parking lot setbacks. And if you actually were to apply those standards to many of these historic resources, you just wouldn't be able to meet them. And, you know, I think that's a little bit of a shame. Some of these historic, especially old residential structures, might make a great office for an insurance agent with their 2 extra staff people, and you just couldn't do it. They wouldn't be able to meet the setbacks or other requirements. And so to pull them into site plan and out of conditional use, it would make it a little easier for adaptive reuse of some of these smaller properties into some of these non-residential uses.
One of the things that concerns me at some level is that it's always difficult to take away something that people have been used to doing. And I picked up on your suggestion that there potentially was a problem or some pushback. It is absolutely shocking to me to think that you could have a master plan site, which presumably is meant to indicate that this is a structure of particular significance, either architecturally, historically, that does not get our attention early on, and might come to us only after there had been this conditional use decision. I think that for me, the distinction there is a historic property versus a master plan site. And so if there were to be unhappiness at giving up a sort of process of dealing with conditional, as long as it didn't impact the master plan sites, you know, people have done this and they could continue to do it, but you're hiving off the master plan as a counter argument, if you will. Because to me, it would be quite shocking to think that there would be no input from the HPC, but maybe what it means is we don't think that master plan sites are really that significant after all.
When I think what ends up happening is, and again, as Dan said, the way this ZTA is structured, it actually compels an applicant to come here first, get the recommendation, and go to the board. The problem with the conditional use process, as it's currently written, there's no compelling reason for anybody to do that. It's not mentioned in the code as to how you do it. You just file an application. Planning staff would identify it's a historic property and loop, historic preservation planning staff into that review, but it's still, and they may choose to bring it before you as a discussion item, but it would not. Right, and so the first time that typically this body would get to actually vote on something is through that HOP process, which, as Dan said, is unfortunately too late. I think we try to avoid that through the voluntary discussions that we have back and forth and point out, you just can't do this, and, as part of your conditional use recommendation. So I do think a lot of that's avoided, but it is true that I don't think it actually gets before this body as a decision authority until much later in the process, the way the law currently functions.
And just the one other point that I would point out is that if in that process with planning staff, when we get looped in and we say, nope, you need a prelim, that puts the brakes on their planning staff review for at least that review cycle. So, you're looking at basically the rest of the planning staff pressing pause for a month. So it really is not responsive to residents and applicants, because they either, they get looped in at the end and then bad things can happen, or they get looped in the middle and things just stretch out. And, our goal, I appreciate that the HPC has made it a goal to be responsive and predictable with things like the solar policy and staff level approvals that make things much more responsive because, again, the HPC decided that a 4-foot fence with a 4-foot open picket wood fence doesn't need to come before you every day. So again, this gets everything out in front and provides the applicants with a more predictable timeline, and more predictable outcomes by seeing you and getting your feedback as early in the process as possible.
Any other questions?
Yes.
Commissioner Burdett.
Okay, so if the proposed site plan route is faster and we get the first crack at it, which is always, we like that. But is the assumption then that a property owner, we're looking at a property to make it a master plan site? This allows that owner, if it's a master plan site, to still have enough flexibility to make it more feasible that they might actually support the designation, or less? Is it gonna encourage more properties being preserved, or will it discourage it?
I don't know that we have data to back that up one way or the other. I mean, I think that, some of it depends on the imagination of the property owner as to what it could become and how to accommodate those changes. We fielded an email earlier today about, well, how is the HPC going to stop a fast food drive-through when it's allowed under the underlying zone? And it was sort of like, wait. No, that's, the use isn't the issue for the HPC. It's how the building or site needs to change to accommodate that use. So, if somebody's looking at a church and they want to put an independent bookstore in, great. I don't think, from small church to large church, I don't think you as a body are going to one, you'd be happy to have an extra bookstore in the county, but, well, yeah. But to convert a church into a bookstore wouldn't necessarily require things that would obliterate the historic character. If somebody wanted to turn, the blacksmith shop into a pizzeria, you might have some issues with that because of all of the changes that would have to be made, aside from changing the roof back. So it depends on the site and the creativity. Now, in 5 years' time with a track record, we may see that people are enticed to do that because of, potential money-making opportunities, but at this point, I don't think that we know one way or the other.
But at least it's a selling point
Potentially, yeah.
to encourage, especially considering the tax credits, which,
And maybe those, marginal properties that are unlivable, it could be just enough to make them economically viable.
thank you.
Any other questions? If not, it's not our role to submit this to the planning board, correct? What we can do is we can make a recommendation to the planning board that they would adopt the site plan option. Am I correct? And we can do that, but we are not submitting it. It is going to be submitted whether we have anything to say or not, correct? Is that correct?
So the board's going to vote tomorrow on the recommendation that it will then transmit to the council. I think what Dan is suggesting is he could also still write a letter that would be signed by this body to
Right.
also provide to the council, in addition, supporting the ZTA and what provisions or tracks or processes.
My understanding is we can make a recommendation to the planning board that they adopt the site plan option of this zoning text amendment. Is that correct?
I mean, to be honest, you can do whatever you want. No,
I can't.
A formal recommendation isn't
Okay, I would-
necessary, but what will happen tomorrow, because we don't have time to formalize.
Write a letter,
And
yeah.
write a letter to the planning board, is tomorrow, Ben and I will synthesize the comments made during this hearing, and will then go and present that information to the planning board to supplement the staff report.
Well, I am going to, as the chair, make a motion. I move that we recommend to the planning board that they adopt the zoning text amendment number 22-6 with the site plan option.
Isn't that the way it's written?
As in site plan only,
Yes.
yes. So you were presented with recommended text.
Yes.
There are a couple of versions floating around, but we
Yes,
wanted to present you with recommended text. So your
The site plan
recommendations are
text.
for the recommended text.
Yes. Is there a second?
I second that motion.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Thank you. So, once it goes through the plan, now that we've done this, so that's fine. Once it goes through the planning board, if they also recommend the site plan option, at that point, you will draft a letter for the board to also recommend to the county council that this be adopted as we have recommended.
Well, regardless of how the planning board votes or what their recommendation is, the letter that I draft for your review and signature will include site plan review only as your body's recommendation.
Right.
So you support the ZTA with site
With-
plan review only.
Yes.
In large part because you are the historic architectural experts in the county, or at least in the county that get to vote on things, and should be the ones to get first crack at that.
Great, thank you. So with that, we will move on to the next item on the agenda, which is historic preservation tax credits. And what we have done in the past is you will give us the batch that we have now. We will accept that batch, but we will hold everything until we have them all in place, at which time we will have a motion to submit it to the whoever. I don't remember who it is.
Department of Finance.
Department of Finance. Okay,
Yes, so this is batch 2 of the 2021 Historic Preservation Tax Credits, and this batch, or this group, is for 23 applications totaling approximately $451,268.18. And again, we're asking that you approve this group, just as you've stated.
Do I have an emotion to approve this batch?
This is Commissioner Burdett. I make a motion to approve the tax credit package that is before us this evening.
Is there a second?
Commissioner Pelletier, I'll
Commissioner,
second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Next item on the agenda is the minutes from June 22nd.
I read the minutes.
Okay,
I would like to make a motion to approve these minutes.
is there a second?
This is Commissioner Burdett. I second the motion.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. The next item on the agenda is commission items. Are there any commission items that need to come before us? If not, I believe we have one staff item.
Yes, we had one staff item at 7 East Irving Street, Chevy Chase. And this is within the Chevy Chase Village Historic District. And this is for screen porch chimney revisions, and we recommend approval.
Would anyone like to make a motion to approve this project? Commissioner Haynes.
Sure. I move that the Historic Preservation Commission approve the changes at 7 East Irving Street, hop number 938248.
This is Commissioner Burdett. I second the motion.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you very much. If there are no other items, I will adjourn this meeting. Thank you all.